Our solution is now sat on our workstation for approximately 1 to 2 minutes. It's hot, absolutely, but it is not boiling hot. To speed up the cooling process, I've got a 600 ml beaker with approximately 2 to 3 centimeters worth of room temperature water, and I set my flask in there gently. The water at room temperature has a high heat capacity, very good thermal contact with the glass, and it will pull out a lot of the heat very quickly. Traditionally, in a lab where we have lots of time, we will let this sit at room temperature for 5, 10, or 15 minutes, which encourages nice slow crystal growth, which allows for the formation of perfect crystals, which really does inhibit any impurities getting trapped inside the crystal structure. This is a compromise because we have only a certain amount of time to carry this lab out, but it's a reasonable compromise. You can see right now that no crystals have yet formed. A minute in the room temperature water, perhaps 2, takes out an awful lot of the heat. At that point, we can move forward into a secondary beaker, which again has approximately 3 centimeters of water. But in this instance, I'm going to add ice. 3 or 4 ice cubes, closer to 8 perhaps. The water's crucial. That sits nicely. The water allows for excellent thermal contact, and of course the ice cools the water, which in the water in fact contacts the glass and allows for efficient cooling. If you simply put the flask on ice, you only get point cooling where it actually touches the ice, but by having an ice water bath, the cooling is much more efficient. We're going to leave this here for several minutes, and while we do this, we are going to set up the vacuum filtration apparatus. So our solution has been sitting in our ice water bath for 2-3 minutes. You can see that a nice bed of crystals are starting to grow. They tend to be plate-like, but you can see on close examination that they actually have a very good regularity to it. Our crystal growth has been slow enough that I suspect that any impurities that were present have been excluded from the crystal structure, leaving us with these nice white snowy flakes that we will be isolating in a minute or 2. I'm going to wait till this is thoroughly cold, approximately 4 to 5 minutes, and at which point we will do a vacuum filtration. All right, so this is what our crystal's looking like now. Sat in the ice bath, it is thoroughly cold, probably better part of 5 minutes, and now we have to separate the liquid, which perhaps does have some of the vinegar or the acetic acid still in it, but we want to isolate the crystals. To do that, we're going to use vacuum filtration. To do that, we have a filtration flask. This will be set up for you. It has a spigot on it. It looks very much like the Erlenmeyer flask that we used previously, but it has a vacuum attachment. We'll be using a water aspirator with thick-walled rubber tubing. Things are clamped securely. We use something called a filter vac. It's just an interface between the Erlenmeyer flask and the Buchner funnel. And filter paper that's the appropriate size. We add a small amount of water to it. Turn on the water aspirator. Just momentarily, that pulls against the filter paper and the moisture and seats the filter paper so it's secure. Now we're ready to transfer our acetoaniline. The best way to do this is, it's not tricky, but I find that if students, they're very careful and they try to pour their material very gently into the filter, what happens is the liquid transfers over and the solid remains. A preferred way of doing this is actually to be relatively aggressive with it. I like to slurry it so it looks very much like a loose slushy, and it makes sure that most of the crystals, not all of the crystals, but most of the crystals are in a slushy type consistency with liquid, but of course you will leave a little bit of material on the side, and that's inevitable. Turn on the vacuum. I give it one last swirl, and then I try to filter it as quickly as I can, reasonably moving all of the suspension over quickly. So with swirling, and I dump. I apply a bit of downward pressure. That just ensures a good seal between the Buchner funnel, the filter vac, and the Erlenmeyer flask. The filter flask allows for a good vacuum, and in very little time, all of the liquid is pulled through. Now you may see that there is a small amount of crystals here. Just a note, a small amount of white crystalline material often looks much more in glassware than there actually is there. But if you feel obligated to remove all of it, you may. I make the suggestion you take a water bottle, put in a handful of ice cubes. The ice cubes are also made of deionized water, so this is not contaminating anything. And using ice cold water, I rinse the flask. Not using massive amounts and realizing that I'm not going to get all of it, but I'm going to get most of it. And I wouldn't do this any more than 3 times. If I were to use lots of water and lots of warm water, I run the risk of dissolving the acetoaniline. It is mildly soluble at room temperature, but I minimize the dissolving of the material by A, making sure the water is ice cold, hence the ice cubes, and B, using a minimal amount of rinses, and now I have pure acetoaniline. This will of course be wet at this point. We can't simply go to the balance now and weigh this material and determine the yields from this. We must give it sufficient time so any moisture that's present, it has an opportunity to dry. To do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit on the funnel, or sorry, on the vacuum apparatus for several minutes, 2 minutes or so. That pulls a large amount of air through it, which does actually help remove a lot of the moisture. But of course, it's not going to be thoroughly dry. To do that, I'll take a crystallization dish and transfer the solid material into the crystallization dish. You can see now that we've got a nice, it's effectively a puck of crystals. 1/2 centimeter thick, covers the entire filter paper. The trick that I figured out a few years ago is what you want to do is instead of shoveling all of the crystals out, if you're delicate enough, you can get in underneath the filter paper and transfer it in its entirety in 1 or 2 small motions. There will be crystals along the inside of the Buckner funnel that's unavoidable. And if you just do a mild scraping with the flat edge of the blade all the way around the funnel, carefully tease underneath the edge of the filter paper, and then transfer the entirety into the funnel, or into the crystallization dish. And in one fell swoop, it does a remarkably good job of transferring all the material. It will be hard, if not impossible, to get all of it, but as long as there's no obvious large lumps, we'll take that as being sufficient.